Have you ever made a request of your spouse that ended up in a fight? Yeah.
Maybe.
Do you feel like you have difficulty clearly expressing your needs? Or maybe that your partner isn't interested in contributing to having your needs met or fulfilled at all? Well, in today's episode, we're going to dig into the science of needs.
So we're going to look at why needs are important and how we actually end up sabotaging ourselves from getting our needs met.
Absolutely.
And then later in the episode, we have a really useful exercise to share with you to help you identify your own needs so that you can better express them to your partner. All of this is up next in this week's episode of Master Your Marriage.
Welcome back to another episode of Master Your Marriage. We are so grateful that you're here with us today. If this is your first time joining the show, welcome. And we thank you for being here. Make sure that while you're here, you hit that subscribe button because we drop a new episode every Wednesday and you don't want to miss it.
Also remember that you can always leave us a question or comment here for the podcast by calling us at 801-669-8513 and leaving a message. And just a reminder, you guys, if you're getting value out of these episodes, please support the show. Whatever platform you're listening on, iTunes, Spotify, whatever, we just ask that you please head over and leave us a 5-star rating and a written review. Now, without further ado, let's move on to today's topic, and we're going to be talking about needs.
So last week we talked about anger, and we said that anger is simply a signal that you are disconnected from your needs. And so we're going to talk about needs today. And we shared an exercise with you on that last episode about how to transform your anger into understanding your needs. So a couple of questions. One, how did that exercise go for you guys? Did you notice, I guess this would be 2, did you notice the last time that you were angry in this week, right, in the last week? And then 3, did you stop to write down what the stimulus was for that anger, right? Also, did you look at your thinking and try to figure out what was causing your anger? And then in doing that, did you discover an unmet need that was hiding out and hanging in there behind that anger?
Yeah, that was a great exercise. And so if you didn't have a chance to listen to last week's episode, it might be helpful to go back and listen to that one in conjunction with this episode today, because today we're going to continue talking more about the topic of needs and how our needs function within the context of our relationship. And even though we are applying the principles today to our marriages or our emotionally committed relationships, I think it's also important just to mention that what we're going to share with you guys today can really be useful and applied to every relationship in your life. So
I actually think that this, as we go over this episode, you're going to realize that this might be the magic sauce for not only getting your needs met, but learning how to just up-level your communication when you're talking to other people.
Yeah, whether that's your kids or friends or coworkers.
Yeah.
Really with anybody.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's begin today's episode with a question that I'd like you to ponder that relates to having our needs met. And that question is, how are we meant to live?
How are we meant to live? That's like an existential question, really, isn't it?
It is.
I wonder how many answers there are. So is there a way, I guess if we look at this, is there a way that we are meant to live? And you probably have some ideas about this, and I have some ideas, and there's probably some sources we can look to into answering this question. And possibly we could turn to philosophy, and maybe even we could return to religion. So if we did an analysis of many religions that are out there in the world, we would find that there's something in most all religious practices that they have in common that might answer this question.
And that answer that I think you would find as you do this like comparative analysis, looking at these different religions, is that they all talk about compassion.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Right? Compassion, I think, is how we're actually meant to live. Compassion is in part where we want to contribute to one another's well-being. And we want to do it because it brings us joy. It brings us joy naturally when we go out and we use our agency, our free will to contribute to actually improving and helping other people's well-being.
I think we always feel joy when we make somebody else feel better.
Right. Yeah. I just think that's our human nature.
Yeah, I think so. Well, in every religion of one form or another, they all place emphasis on compassion. And maybe they do that in just different ways, but this concept also extends kind of beyond religion, right?
Yeah. And I was thinking about this as we were preparing and just how my experiences with NLP, with neuro linguistic programming and studying the unconscious mind, this principle has come up there in science as well, that it's really our basic nature. It's kind of like our prime directive of our unconscious mind to want to use our power to enrich our own life and to enrich other people's lives. So, I think sometimes we forget that, or we get detached from who we really are. And maybe we don't always act and behave as though this is our human nature. But I do think this is really who we are really meant to be and how we're meant to live, where we desire and are fulfilled by helping other people to meet their needs and to get more out of life.
Yeah, I like that. I like that when we're helping other people. And again, I think that's the piece that brings us joy. And
Yes.
when we're truly acting and giving compassionately, we do this willingly, and it does bring us joy. And it shouldn't, and it's not usually done out of guilt or shame or fear, or maybe even some fear of punishment. It's usually, and it's not done to try and buy someone's love, or because we think that if we submit to them, that we're doing what they expect us to do. We should be giving solely out of the joy that comes from contributing to building up and giving to each other's lives.
That's right. And the way we do this is by contributing to one another's well-being, is by really just looking at the human needs of one another and whether or not our human needs are being fulfilled or not. And when they're not, then we obviously look for how we can take action to fulfill those needs or to nourish those needs.
And if you remember what we said last week, that anger is a signal that our needs are not being met. And the truth is that all our feelings are simply signals. They are revealing to us whether our needs are being met or whether our needs are not being met. And when we feel pleasurable feelings, we know that our needs are generally being met. And when we feel painful or unpleasant feelings, we can generally then realize that our needs are not being met or not being fulfilled.
Right. And so this idea that we're talking about today of compassionately giving to one another as part of who we innately are, this is core in our relationships, right? When we talk about our marriages and we talk about our emotionally committed relationships, this is core to that. And when we are able to share our needs with our partner, we are able to share with them what would make our life more wonderful, what would make us feel more alive.
And in return, we must be able to receive that same information from our partner, such as what would make their life more wonderful.
Right.
So this is how we're able to kind of connect. I think as we know what makes one another's lives meaningful and wonderful, then we can use that information to connect deeply and intimately with each other. When we're able to connect sort of in this way, we're able to help each other feel more alive. And then we're really contributing to one another's overall well-being, or even their sense of well-being, but their well-being altogether.
Yeah, well said. But it's also important to realize that there are certain ways that we tend to communicate that can be really destructive to our relationship and will totally sabotage us in getting our needs met. And so we're going to share with you what those communication patterns are in just a second. But first, I kind of wanted to just talk a little bit about how early on in our marriage, we did all of these.
Oh, we were a dumpster fire of communication.
We were a dumpster fire of communication. And so when it came to getting our needs met, we've seen both sides of the coin where, early on in our marriage, it was like, okay, I'm making demands, I'm not making requests, and I'm using these really dangerous communication patterns that are destructive because I'm going to force you to, make my needs happen for me. And there's a big cost that comes with that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if meeting each other's needs, if meeting one another's needs and understanding that we're contributing to their well-being, when we're having this nonviolent communication is the way that we do it. If we end up forcing each other to meet each other's needs, then we're not going to have closeness. We're not going to have intimacy, and we're probably going to have resentment.
And the other person isn't going to do it out of the joy that they receive from meeting your needs if it's being done by force.
Right.
right?
Or coercion or anything, right?
Right. So let's talk about what these patterns are, and then maybe we'll flip back and forth to kind of how we've transformed our relationship, because this was something that was a big problem for us early on in our marriage 32 years ago.
And I think everybody has that. Again, we've talked about so many times on this show, like how we have, these patterns of speaking and acting that we were raised with. And so if you're raised with some of these patterns that I'm going to point out, I want you to kind of look out for them. If you're raised with some of these, like just, be aware of that. And we'll have some exercises that we'll do a little bit later, but we want you to kind of watch out for these and sort of eliminate these from your communication patterns. So,
well, I think that like, you're right. The way that we're raised shapes how we communicate later in our relationship. And certainly the things that I know I did that were destructive, such as criticism and contempt that I brought into the relationship, that's what I saw modeled for me. That's how I saw, like, guilt was a big way that in my home growing up, that was how you got the kids to do things. It was a lot of guilt and shame. So we do take those patterns and we go on autopilot and we live sort of unconsciously just recreating that until we learn what you're about to share.
Yeah. And so here's some of those patterns. And if you use them, you might notice that people in your life maybe aren't so interested in helping you get your needs met. They actually won't want to do anything with you. So one of the first patterns is any language that sounds like criticism or blame or insult or cutting down or any of those types of things. That's not going to get you anywhere.
So basically back to the 4 horsemen that we've talked about over and over on the show: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, any of the sneering, snickering, eye rolling, all of those types of things in any kind of language or nonverbal language that implies those criticisms and insults.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the second thing is when we present our request to our partner or anyone in any way in which they hear it as a demand rather than a request. So that's tricky because sometimes we have to tailor and adjust our communication a little bit, and even sometimes ask for feedback, like, help me to rephrase that in a way in which you're hearing that as a request versus a demand, because I want to deliver it in that way. And so I think, for you and I both, we've had to learn how to communicate that in different ways by asking and getting feedback.
Yeah.
How can I make this sound like a request?
Yeah, without a doubt. And sometimes that's just backing up, like, hitting the delete button on your keyboard, in your brain. You're like, hey, can you get me that? It's like, oh, maybe back that up. It's like, hey, could you hand me that? My hands are full or busy.
Right.
And that's the, that, and this just goes back to the stuff we talked about before, like early repair, right? I came in a little sharp. I'm just backing up and I'm realizing that my communication didn't come off the way I wanted to.
So the first was insults, criticisms, blame. The second was demands. And then the third is when we use punishment or fear of punishment.
Ooh, that's brutal.
To get our needs met.
Yeah. So anytime people hear criticism, and this is anybody, hear criticism or demands, it really becomes very difficult for them to want to contribute to your well-being, that is meeting your needs. And this is why we want to avoid those strategies, or any strategies where you're attempting to influence or manipulate people to get them to do what you want them to do. In fact, you probably want to just shoot for doing the opposite. We want people to know that we would never want our request to be met if it was being done out of guilt or shame or threat or criticism or anger or anything like that.
Exactly. So anytime we use criticism, blame, insults, fear as a way to get someone to fulfill a request, it's going to come with a high cost, right? It's going to come with a cost, because even if they do it, even if you get your way, even if your partner gives you what you want, they're not giving it compassionately from their heart. They're doing it because they're just trying to avoid hurt. They're trying to avoid something like shame or guilt or fear. And anything that is given out of that energy is going to have a high cost to both partners. You might get what you want, but there's a big cost down the road. And that cost can come in the form of lifelong resentment or years of resentment, broken trust, and I think as I look back to our relationship earlier on, when I would use criticism and insults and things like that to get what I wanted, you just pulled back and we weren't able to connect. We weren't able to be intimate. Physically intimate we could, but emotionally intimate, we struggled because you'd put up those walls.
Yeah. If you're if you're sort of being beat over the head with a request until you made it happen, I know on my part, I was just like, I don't even, that's the same person you don't even really want to be around.
Yeah.
It's like having a boss that's just riding you nonstop. You're like, I'm not going to stay at work and do this.
And that comes with broken trust. And then it took us a long time, years to work on rebuilding that trust again. So it's really just not worth it.
Yeah. So if you find yourself in the situation where your needs aren't being met and you're considering using one of those strategies like criticism, blame, or insults, I'd like you to just maybe pause and rethink that. Let's ask ourselves a couple of questions. And there's two here. And this maybe will help you frame your request, the request to get your needs met. Okay. Question number one, assuming your spouse or someone else is doing something you don't like, what would you like them to do differently?
Okay, good. And then question number two is, what do you want the other person's reasons to be for doing what it is you're requesting of them? What do you want their reasons to be for doing what you want them to do? And so really think about this question for a second, because when you stop and ask yourself this question, it becomes really obvious, because it kind of takes us out of that autopilot that I mentioned earlier, where we're just doing what we've always done.
Right.
And it causes us to pause, because of course we want our partner to do it willingly. We want them to do it joyfully because they enjoy contributing to our well-being. We don't want them to do it because they fear us, hate us, shame, or because we shame them, or because we guilt them.
And we've all been in that situation where we've made a request and said, I don't care how they feel about it. I just want them to get it done. And that's when you're frustrated. And just understand that when you lead with that frustration with someone you love, then you're just you're damaging that relationship, whether it's with your children, whether it's with your friends, especially when it's with the one, your emotionally committed partner, your wife, your husband.
Yeah. And, no amount of like that one time of getting the floors vacuumed, or organizing the spice cabinet, or whatever the need is. I'm just coming up with stuff. But like that, in that quick moment, the years of resentment and broken trust is never worth that couple minutes of vacuuming the floor.
Yeah. I mean, without a doubt.
Right.
So again, this is why we want you to make sure that you always avoid any language that sounds like criticism, blame, or insults. We want you to avoid presenting your requests in a way that your partner hears as demanding or threatening.
Okay, so that's what we don't want to do.
Okay.
But what do we want to do instead to be able to express our needs clearly?
So before we can learn how to articulate our needs, we first need to become conscious and literate in what our needs actually are. So we need to know what our needs are before we can actually talk about how to ask for them.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And that is going to be a lot like learning a new language. And most people we're going to say disconnected from their needs. They're not used to understanding them and even working through them.
Yeah, for sure. Like I look at a lot of the women that I talk to in coaching, and a lot of us have difficulty expressing our needs because we've been educated to, or programmed to think that good women don't have needs. Loving women don't have needs. They sacrifice their needs because they're a mom or a wife or a woman, and they sacrifice for the children and their families.
Yeah, they always put themselves second, right? Mm-hmm. Second, third, fourth, fifth.
Are men any different?
No, well, and here's the thing with guys, right? We've been taught that, we don't have needs. Like that's sort of showing weakness, right? And we've sort of been told that brave men don't have any needs, and that we should, we should sacrifice everything, right? For God, family, country, the flag, your kids come first, your wife come first. And so because that's how we are, I don't want to say raised, but that's a lot of the narrative around growing up as a guy. We don't really think about the things that we need.
Exactly. So that's why you said it's like learning a new language to even learn what our needs are.
Yeah.
So most of us have really been taught this way of thinking that has cut us off from our needs, and therefore caught us off from like really living. So instead we've been taught, and you'll see why this is relevant in just a second, we've been taught this language of how to criticize and how to judge and how to blame others.
Yeah. So to begin to change, we need to, again, develop this new language and become literate in the language of our needs. And how, your question is, like, how am I going to do that? Well, Get out your pen and paper because here we go, or open the notes app on your phone. There's this exercise again this week, and this exercise comes from Dr. Marshall Rosenberg and his teachings from nonviolent communication.
And so for this exercise, I want you to think for a second, maybe write this down. I want you to think of the most common ways that you judge others.
Yeah, what is your favorite judgment?
What are the criticisms, the blaming words that you typically use to describe other people in your life? It can be your spouse. It doesn't have to be just your spouse. It can be really anyone.
Yeah, what are the common words or the common judgments you use? As I said, your favorites, right? Is it they're stupid or selfish? So we just want you to make a list of these words. For example, some people will say selfish is one of their top words, or, like that's such a selfish thing to do,
You're
or
so
you're being
selfish.
so selfish. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Others will say that's a stupid thing to do, or, you did something stupid, or I can't believe you're so stupid,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or you had no right to do that. So go ahead and write down the list of your most commonly used phrases that represents the criticism or the blaming words that you use to describe others.
And
so
that could
write
be,
those down.
It could be in your head, or it could be like actually verbally out loud. Because I think a lot of these things we say in our own mind.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
And once you have this list, then look at this list and make just an observation. Okay. You don't need to judge ourselves harshly here, but just make an observation and ask yourself, what might someone have done, said that was a stimulus for us thinking those thoughts? What was the stimulus that brought us to think those things? And just like we suggested in last week's episode, notice that all the criticism and blame that you have on your list there, it's really just another expression of an unmet need. So just like anger, criticism and blame is a signal that you have an unmet need. And there's a better way, possibly a more truthful way, to simply say what the need is rather than using those words of blame and criticism.
And this is so hard because we're really good at judgment and criticism. That's our default, right? And we're not really good at talking about our needs, but we're again great at doing judgments. So this exercise is going to help you develop this whole new language. And so just keep going through your list and translate these criticisms and judgments into needs.
And we suggest that you try to get at least 9 basic human needs on your list that you'll use later, as we talk about in next week's episode. You'll use this later to better articulate your needs in your relationship. So why did we pick 9, a minimum of 9, Robert?
Well, there's an individual by the name of Manfred Max Neef, and he and his colleagues actually they evaluate the success of different economies a little differently we do in the United States. In the United States, and maybe to other places in the world, we base the success of your economy based on gross national product, or GDP, gross domestic product, right? But Max Neef's approach says that economic success is based on whether or not human needs are met by all of the parties in that culture.
Interesting. So since his whole system of economy is based on human needs, he's obviously spent a lot of time researching what the basic human needs are that need to be fulfilled in order to have a safe, healthy, peaceful world. So we thought, why not look at what his needs are that he came up with? And he narrowed it down to 9 core human needs. And you might find it interesting to compare your list that you came up with doing that exercise to his list. And you might even find several words on your list that might mean the same thing, because there's obviously multiple ways to express the same idea.
All right. So according to Max Neef, the first need is sustenance. And by that, he means physical needs such as food, air, water, and shelter. And I'm thinking of one more.
The second need that Manfred Max Neef talks about is safety or protection.
And the third need that he suggests is love. And I think that's a lot closer to what I thought would be the first need.
The fourth need is empathy.
Fifth would be rest, recreation, and play.
The sixth need is community. We all need some sort of community, a warm community around us.
The seventh need would be creativity.
And the eighth need is autonomy. We've talked a lot about autonomy on the show in other episodes. We, as human beings, all have a strong need to choose our own way in life and not to have it be dictated by others. And when it is dictated by others, it threatens this need of ours for autonomy. And any parent, if you're a parent, can attest that this is something that becomes alive in us from a very early age.
Oh, yeah.
Because we all know children's, one of their first words is what?
That's no.
No, I'm not going to do that.
They're
No.
exerting their autonomy.
Right.
They just want to grow up right then at 2.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So they're hearing a demand. And, even as a child, when we hear demands, it threatens this very basic need to choose our own way in life.
So the 9th need, as described by Viktor Frankl, describes this. It's a need for meaning or a need for purpose. This is our innate need to contribute in life and to see how our efforts have made our life and other people's lives richer and more fulfilled.
So we want you to create your own list of needs. You may not use the same exact words. You may not use the word autonomy. You might say something else like freedom, but it can still have the same meaning for you. Either way, we just want to challenge you to come up with a needs vocabulary, a list of at least 9 core needs that you have that you'll be able to start to use more in your communication, which we're going to talk more about next week.
Yeah. And even though we may have this different vocabulary, we all have the same basic needs. And this is something very important. And it's really important for us to become conscious of these needs, right? All human beings have basically the same needs. And to really connect with your partner, with anyone for that matter, it's helpful to recognize that we have the same needs.
And I think it's useful because we just need to be able to, since we all have the same core needs, really all we need to do is just become better at being able to express these needs in a language, in a way that the other person can resonate with so that they willingly want to contribute to our well-being and we then also want to contribute to their well-being.
On our next episode, we're going to talk more about how to express these needs clearly and how to make sure that your requests don't sound like demands and how to compassionately say no when someone has a request for you that you don't want to honor. But in the meantime, we'd encourage you to do the exercise from last week and also do the exercise from today and come up with your vocabulary of needs. I think you're going to find that very interesting.
Okay, so that was really useful. And as you said, we're going to dig more into this next week. I know we're breaking this up into 3 different episodes because it's a lot. I think if we do it in stages and we do these 2 exercises, then when we get to next week, we'll be able to put it all together. So, just first really focus on creating this needs vocabulary. And once again, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode for now, but we really just, again, like to say how grateful we are to each of you that you're here each week.
Absolutely.
And just ask that you continue to support the show. As we've mentioned before, the algorithm really does feed off of those ratings and comments. And so for us to be able to make a bigger impact in the world, which obviously is part of our purpose and our mission, we just really ask for your continued support. And so if you wouldn't mind showing us a little love by leaving a 5-star review and a comment, that helps us a ton.
More importantly, and as always, if there's someone in your life that needs help in their relationship that would benefit from this episode or any of the others, we ask that you would kindly share our podcast with them.
And of course, be kind to each other this week. Take care of each other. Remember, it's the small things done often that makes the biggest impact.
Until next time.